The military-industrial complex may seem like the untouchable, like organized, sophisticated giants. But if the Palestinian girl has the courage to smile in the front of the barrel of a rifle, if the Palestinian child has the courage to pelt a stone to the turret of a sophisticated tank, then we too must have the courage to leave dents on this military-industrial complex. And dents after dents after dents, we will see this giant fail and fall.
No conflict in history has soft and toothless approaches managed to shift a fascist government from achieving what it wants. If they can maintain their relationships, if they can maintain funding from the US, if they can maintain support from Australia, Israel is going to continue doing what it does. No matter if Penny Wong smiles, shakes their hand and say, hey, you should probably stop violating international law, because they don't care. They really don't care.
Now, if Canada and countries around the world can ban weapons trade with Israel, then why can't Australia? Like, this is the bare minimum that we could be doing right now. There are brave protesters attempting to stop the export of weapons from Australia to Israel, but they are being met with violence from Australian police. Australians are pretty sick right now of a government that can't even do the bare minimum to stop the killing of men, women and children in Gaza. And frankly, this Labor government has underestimated the public opposition to this. They have underestimated how angry and fed up people are. And come the next federal election, I think they will learn what happens when they give up all moral legitimacy and help fund and support a genocide in Gaza.
Yes, it's not just a shame. We have the power. We do have the power to stop them. And we will. We will. It's not just claiming or going to Albo and telling him, kindly please, Albo, would you mind to change your mind? It doesn't work like this. Not anymore. Not anymore. All what we need is to remember our existence as a human being. To support the existence of humanity, not just for our being of Palestinian. I'm Palestinian, but I'm saying it. It's not just the Palestinian. It's us. It's every one of us.
What we're doing here, we're doing what we can with where we are, and a lot of people around the country, around the world, are also doing what they can with where they are.
Mutual, la, mutual, la. This is the Mutual Broadcasting System.
What we are witnessing is the exposure of lies, that colonization is neither benevolent or non-violent.
To understand the resistance would be to understand settler colonialism, for which mainstream media is intimately entwined with the state in this country.
Everything we do here, everything we do is really counts.
Our liberation will never be found in states, in governments, in courts, but it will be found in each other.
You're listening to the Justice for Palestine podcast.
This podcast is produced on the unceded lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people by the Radio Reversal Collective.
In this podcast, we're aiming to create a living archive of the movement for Palestinian liberation in this city and the work that organisers, activists, artists, academics, workers, parents and everyday people are doing to challenge the genocidal project of the Israeli government.
You know, I want to quote Mario Savio, who was a student activist in the civil rights movement and who was arrested on the university campus of Berkeley for speaking about civil rights. And you know, when he got back to campus, there was mass protests called for free speech. And he said this. He said, "There is a time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels and upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop." Well, Farah makes me sick to my stomach. Yeah. The operation of Farah is odious. It makes me sick. And I'm going to put my body on the apparatus of that machine and make it stop. Yeah.
That was Birragoba and Wanjuruba Solidarity organiser Sam Waripa Watson. speaking at a blockade outside of Ferrer Engineering in Tingalpa in February. We'll be hearing more from Sam and other activists involved in that campaign throughout this, our 8th episode of the Justice for Palestine McGungeon podcast, where we're seeking to deepen our understanding of how the military-industrial complex functions to produce profits from genocides and ecocides here on this continent, as well as in Palestine and West Papua and other nations around the world, while keeping a central focus on the struggle against Israel's active, ongoing genocide of Palestinians in Gaza and their continual campaigns of violence in the West Bank across occupied Palestine, as well as into Lebanon, Yemen, and Syria. We'll be exploring how all this violence is interconnected with settler colonial practices of warmongering worldwide. I'm Roshan, one of the Radio Reversal Collective who are producing this podcast, and I'm a white settler living as an uninvited guest on Yagara and Turrbal land. So I want to pay deep and abiding respect to the rightful owners of this land, to elders past and present, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and stand in solidarity with their ongoing resistance to colonisation. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. In this double episode, we'll be hearing the voices of many, many different locally engaged activists, politicians, and everyday people. To begin with, we'll be getting a big picture overview of the state of things when it comes to the so-called Australian federal government's investment in militarism and the military-industrial complex, hearing from Green Senator for New South Wales David Shoebridge, Palestinian organiser Amal Nasser, long-term peace activist Lenny, and wage peace organiser Margie Pistorius. Afterwards, in the second half of this jam-packed episode, we'll be hearing about some of the ways that resistance and solidarity is being practiced at a grassroots level in our local communities. Specifically, we'll be hearing from Students for Palestine member Louisa McCarthy, Solidarity organiser Sam Reaper Watson, Papuan organiser Ronnie from West Papua, Palestinian organiser Rima Naji from Justice for Palestine McGungeon, Greens member for Griffith Max Chandler Mather, Benil Mohideen from Queensland Muslim Incorporated, and community organisers Dane and Phil Monsor. We'll kick off with Senator Shoebridge, speaking in the Senate on the 7th of November last year about the lack of transparency that surrounds the government's involvement in international weapons exports, followed afterwards by Labor Senator for Queensland Murray Watt's response.
Few people know that Australia has one of the most secretive and unaccountable weapons export systems in the world. Our government doesn't tell us who we're exporting weapons to, doesn't tell us what the weapons are, and doesn't tell us who profits here in Australia from the sale of weapons. And indeed, what we do know is that Australia has a sorry history of selling weapons to regimes that are engaged in some of the ugliest conflicts on the planet. Selling weapons to both sides of the conflict in South Sudan, to both South Sudan and Sudan. Selling weapons to Saudi Arabia, which is currently involved in the appalling conflict riven with human rights abuses in Yemen. And, of course, selling weapons after weapons after weapons to Israel. And rather remarkably, Australia's secrecy on weapons sales contrasts poorly even with the United States. The US, amidst massive public pressure for their fueling of war crimes, have sought to hide and were seeking to hide the weapons they were sending to Israel. That was considered, in the US context, a serious breach of basic transparency measures and rejected by the US Congress. But in Australia, we would call that secrecy the norm. Indeed, let that sink in. We are more secretive and less accountable in the way that we export weapons than the US military-industrial complex. There are more secrets about Australia's exports than that of the US. And if you really want to find out about Australia's weapons purchases, most often you find it out from disclosures in the US Congress. Australia should not be fueling war crimes, and Australia should be transparent about the weapons it's sending to fuel conflict around the globe.
Senator Shoebridge, you are aware that I am not able to confirm the details of particular arms exports to any country in the world. Australia's defence exports are conducted in line with robust export guidelines and international obligations, and the Department of Defence assesses each export application on its own merits against the relevant legislative criteria under the Defence Trade Controls Act 2012. This legislation addresses a range of issues, including those that you've raised, including foreign policy, human rights, national security and Australia's international obligations. And if Defence identifies an export would be contrary to Australia's national interest or pose risks to Australia's security, defence or international relations, the permit is refused. So, under this government, Australia's export controls regime provides a balance between protecting our defence and security interests, meeting our international obligations, including around human rights and arms trading, and also supporting Australia's sovereign industrial capability. But I will be clear about this. The government appreciates this is a complex and sensitive area of public policy that must account for security interests, human rights obligations and the viability of domestic industry.
Senator Watt saying the quiet part quietly there, offering brief admissions that the state's so-called sovereign industrial ability, alongside the viability of domestic industry, are key factors in the government's decision-making processes surrounding weapons trade. This is telling of the ways that, despite the Senator's claims that transparency cannot be provided for reasons of national security, the kind of security being referred to here is more related to the safeguarding of lucrative assets in the form of military wares and their possession by wealthy stakeholders than it is related to the safety and well-being of human and more than human lives. But we'll hear more about the government's financial investment in the military-industrial complex later in this episode. In the meantime, in the following recording from earlier this year, Senator Shoebridge speaks with Amal Nasser, third-generation Palestinian refugee and present-day organizer, about the ways that despite Senator Watt's unverifiable assertions that the Department of Defence is acting in accordance with international law, the Australian government is patently complicit in ongoing Palestinian genocide, as well as also speaking to what exactly the legislative, moral and political responsibilities of the Australian government are. Here's Amal.
What I want to talk to everyone about today is obviously the legal, moral and political obligations that the state has in terms of military exports. And I'll start off with legal and then move on to moral and political. And this is really a really important framework when it comes to advocating against Australian militarism, not just in the context of Israel, of course, but in the context of Sudan, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Indonesia, and so many countries around the world who are complicit in various crimes against humanity and war crimes. So our legal obligations are quite long, but there are a lot of loopholes that Australia likes to use to try to avoid them. A really major aspect is that Australia actually ratified the Arms Trade Treaty in 2014. Under this treaty, particularly Article 7 of this treaty, any export, military export that a country makes, including parts of weapons, the government must consider in every scenario when they export a weapon or an arm as to whether it would contribute to or undermine peace of security and significantly could be used to commit or facilitate serious violations of international humanitarian law or international human rights law. And it also must take into account the risk of arms being used to commit serious acts of gender-based violence or violence against women and children. And of course, in the context of Gaza, we are seeing very serious violations of international humanitarian law. We are seeing collective punishment, war crimes, the bombing of hospitals and refugee camps and schools. These are all war crimes and violations of international humanitarian law. On top of that, our war on Gaza is a war on women and children. 50% of the population of Gaza is children. 70% of people who have been murdered in Gaza are women and children. So what we know is that if Australia is actively sending military exports to Israel, there is a major risk that Australia is in violation of its obligations under Article 7. This is not just post-October 7, which Penny Wong will maybe use to try to avoid it, but it is even pre-then. We saw violations in the past 5 years where we've sold over $13 million in arms to Israel. In 2021, we saw violations of international humanitarian law during the carpet bombing of the Gaza Strip. We've seen violations of international humanitarian law through settler militias and their attacks of the Palestinian people in the occupied West Bank, and the attacks of refugee camps in Jenin, and so on and so forth. So violations of international humanitarian law are certainly not limited to post-October 7, and it is quite clear Australia has violated its obligations to an arms trade treaty that it has signed and it has become a signatory to. However, and very significantly, Australia has done something very serious to avoid accountability. So in 2013, when the arms trade treaty was being negotiated, and it had finally been negotiated and released for signing, Amnesty noted that in order for the arms trade treaty to be effective in any way or form, states must agree to an annual reporting system to promote accountability. And this is because states must be able to scrutinize one another as to how they are selling the arms, and a violation of the arms trade treaty can lead to Australia being scrutinized within the ICJ's jurisdiction. So a state can take Australia for courts for violation of the arms trade treaty. However, at present, this is almost impossible because Australia did not do what Amnesty requested, which is agreeing to an annual reporting system, but rather Australia has the least transparent arms export system in the Western world. And this prevents itself from being held into account. And this is really significant. If we just had a transparent system, which we do have, which we should, and we should have obligations to do that, we wouldn't need to do all this unpicking. We would have information from the Australian government as to where our arms are being exported to. And the United States, who is renowned for violating international human rights law on every level possible, has a much more transparent system than Australia, and that is quite significant within itself. So it's really important that in our advocacy, we don't just advocate for Australia to no longer send military exports to Israel, which, as Senator Shoebridge noted earlier, they've been avoiding that by saying we don't give anything to Israel, but we should be advocating for a more transparent system so it becomes more easy to not just scrutinize them on a political level, but on a legal level as well, bringing in violations of treaties that they are signatories to and have ratified. Now, the more significant aspect of that, so this was always a legal obligation from day one, has been for the past 5 years. However, in this present context, there's even a more significant legal obligation, which is the very fact that supplying arms to a country who is engaging in genocide is a crime of complicity. And this isn't speculation, this isn't what academic scholarship has noted. This was noted itself by the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, which was obviously founded to investigate and prosecute the crime of genocide in Rwanda. And they explicitly linked weapons to genocide, stating that a state actor may be complicit in genocide by procuring means such as weapons, instruments, or any other means used to commit genocide, with the accomplice knowing that such means would be used for such purpose. Very wordy sentence. But basically what this means is that if the Australian government is aware that a state is engaging in a genocidal campaign and they then provide arms to this state, they can be charged as an accomplice in genocide. Now, of course, this is significant because the ICJ has since come out 2 weeks ago and noted that there is a plausible risk of genocide. At this point, Australia and Western countries around the world have been put on notice. There is a plausible risk that Israel is engaging in genocide. And the preliminary measures did not just mean that Israel itself must do whatever it can to not engage in genocide, but state actors around the world must also do everything in their power to prevent a genocide. And in the case of Australia, this is ending military exports. If we have been sending, as suspected, military weapons and equipment to Israel in the aftermath of October 7, we are very likely complicit in a genocide. And this is something that Australia could be prosecuted for in the future if we had a transparent system where there was heaps of evidence to show that, but indeed investigative work and research has already been able to uncover that. So it's really imperative that the Australian government respect ICJ findings and respect the international rule-based order that they only seem to hypocritically follow when it is within their foreign interests to do so. They're very capable of following ICJ decisions when it comes to the war on Ukraine because Russia is not an ally and it is within their own foreign geopolitical interests. But they should be also respecting international law and their obligations under international law, even when it comes to a supposed ally. But on top of that, international law, even on on a more critical level, international law has been interpreted and read and designed to protect Western state actors within the global north and their geopolitical interests. We've seen that time and time again. We've seen in the way that international law has been designed to protect countries like the United States and Australia, Canada, and the UK in colonial missions and imperialist missions, which has led to the massacres of thousands. Indeed, when it came to the war on Iraq, international law was weaponized to justify the war in Iraq, which eventually murdered over 1 million civilians. And I remind everyone, this was in early 2003, and it was this idea that there was a right to self-defense that was not just put forward by politicians, but international law scholars as well, to justify the illegal, which we now commonly know as the illegal invasion of Iraq. So trying to argue on the international law level, whilst it's very effective and useful, we need to understand its limitations and the fact that loopholes within international law are actively being weaponized by countries within the global north to prevent any form of accountability and to negate any complicity in the current genocide. So we have to bring it down to a human level. We have to bring it down to a moral and ethical level. Let's just say Australia didn't sign the Arms Trade Treaty, or it wasn't a signatory to the Genocide Convention. This does not mean there is no moral case not to provide military weapons to a country who is engaging in genocide. So for example, let's talk about the drones that are being provided to Israel. For example, we are talking about Palestinians who are on the ground, who every waking moment, they are hearing the buzzing of these drones that are surveilling their people, murdering their people, traumatizing them on every level. And these drones are Australian made and exported. When it comes to F-35 planes, the door where the bomb is being unleashed is Australian made and exported. Australia's very name is on the very weapons that are killing Palestinian people, that are protecting Israeli settler militars and military, and are being actively encountered by Palestinians who are so deeply traumatized by this war. There is no moral case for war. There is no moral case for the murder of over 25,000 people, including women and children. And because of that, we have to push our government that we do not morally stand with military weapons being sent to countries violating not just international law, but just violating basic principles of humanity and dignity. The Palestinian people are human too, and they deserve to live and breathe the way that Israeli life has been treated as sacred. Palestinians deserve that too. And we really need to reevaluate our government's gross immorality towards people that live in the global south. Because if it was Israeli hospitals that were being bombed, if Hamas tunnels were supposedly under Israeli hospitals, there would never be a justification for the bombing of Israeli hospitals with Israeli civilians in it. And that is because simply Israeli lives have been treated as more important than Palestinian lives. And we must dictate that that is unacceptable. Indigenous lives are just as important as white lives per se. And it is important that the global south are treated as human too, that life is respected and that our life is treated as sacred too. And we are not just continuously murdered for the geopolitical interests and the greed of the global north. It's absolutely ludicrous that we live in a day and age where these murders continue to be justified, but that our taxpayer dollars and our government is actively sending weapons that are murdering people within the global south. It's just something that can no longer be justified, and it's an important moral claim to make when Australia tries to negate any legal responsibility that it has. But finally, there is also a political responsibility here. After refusing to support ICJ hearings, the Albanese government did maintain a sense of neutrality when it came to the ICJ. They certainly didn't come out in support of it, but unlike the UK and the US and Canada, they didn't, strongly suggest that it shouldn't have happened. They said, they support the right for ICJ hearings to happen. They're not a party to it. And they noted that they don't think the ICJ would be useful, and this conflict is best left to be resolved politically. Okay, so we need to tell Albanese how to do that. If he thinks that this conflict is best to be resolved politically, then he needs to be doing his job, because he's currently not doing that. They're currently not resolving this conflict politically. If you want to politically resolve a conflict, we need to look at the way conflicts have been resolved in the past. How was apartheid dismantled in South Africa? It wasn't with our prime ministers at the time going in and shaking the hands of apartheid leaders in South Africa and having coffee with them, wining and dining with them, shaking their hands, smiling and taking photos with people who are making genocidal remarks, with people who were advocating for apartheid. It was made by withdrawing diplomatic support, by boycotting, by no longer engaging with these countries and isolating them on every potential stage possible. That is how it was achieved. If Australia imposed an arms embargo on Israel, if Australia withdrew diplomatic support, if Australia started sanctioning Israeli leaders and isolating them from the world stage, these are proven political tactics that work from the government. And in no conflict in history has soft and toothless approaches managed to shift a fascist government from achieving what it wants. If they can maintain their relationships, if they can maintain funding from the US, if they can maintain support from Australia, Israel is going to continue doing what it does. No matter if Penny Wong smiles, shakes their hand and say, hey, you should probably stop violating international law, because they don't care. They really don't care. So this is why these are so just to summarize all of that, we have obviously our legal arguments and our legal claims, which our government has rejected they have any legal obligation whatsoever. We have a moral claim, which our government has shown that they absolutely have incredibly have dehumanized the Palestinian people, and probably understand they have a moral cause but do not care. And obviously the political case, which is something the government acknowledges is a way forward to resolve this conflict, but have done nothing political that will actually resolve this conflict. And I guess a major aspect of all of this is we need to ask why. Why has the Australian Labor government, who's led by Albanese, who historically has been a bit minorly supportive of the Palestinian people, who certainly hasn't been, headstrong at the forefront like members of the Greens, but why is it that this government is so stubborn as to their support of Israel? And it has a lot to do with AUKUS and the AUKUS alliance and our ties to the US. And for those who don't know what AUKUS is, it's a military alliance that we formed with the UK and the US to help build nuclear submarines. And I'm going to pass it off to David to talk more about AUKUS, because he's very passionate about this. So he's better to speak about it.
Thanks so much, Amal. Yeah, well, so why is the Albanese Labor government adopting a policy that in substance would be identical to what the coalition, a Morrison coalition or a Dutton coalition government is delivering in relation to this conflict? Why? I think it comes back to the US alliance, and the current cornerstone of the US alliance is twofold. There's the ANZUS Treaty, which was signed in the 1950 or so, where there's an obligation that the United States has to consult with Australia if we get attacked. And Australia has been, ever since the signing of that treaty, so desperate to be a little loyal ally of the United States, so that if ever we do get attacked, there's some kind of commitment that the US will come riding in to save us. There's that. But more recently, it's seen in the context of AUKUS. And AUKUS is just one of the ways you could arrange the acronyms for Australia, the United Kingdom, and the US. There's SUCCA as well as another way if you wanted to arrange the acronyms. But AUKUS is the one that they use. And AUKUS is, there's like three elements to AUKUS. The first is a political arrangement between literally the United Kingdom, the United States, and Australia, designed to show a kind of unity between those three Anglo-Western countries, as they would perceive themselves to be, largely against China. It's a political statement against China, a military political statement against China. That's the first part of it, a political military statement. The second part is an agreement for Australia to get nuclear submarines from the United States and then co-produce the United Kingdom. And that is utterly dependent on the goodwill of the United States. The UK is a bit player in that. It's utterly dependent on the United States' goodwill. And the third part of AUKUS is an enmeshing of our defence forces and our science with the United States and the UK to produce some kind of tripartite bubble where we share weapons technology between us. They're the three key elements of AUKUS. But that was obviously a deal negotiated by Morrison, signed on by his government, coalition government, and then uncritically accepted by Albanese when he was opposition leader. I mean, that's not unusual. Labor has been, particularly Labor right, but now increasingly the left of Labor, are subtly tied to the US alliance. They have not raised a whimper with the signing of AUKUS, not raised a whimper with Australia going down the nuclear path, not raised a whimper when the United States has expanded the range and role of what Pine Gap does as a joint facility between Australia and the United States, but it's really just a United States facility. We know the Pine Gap, for example, is used to target extrajudicial killings, drone killings by the United States. It's probably being used at the moment by the Israeli military to help target some of their assaults in Gaza. And of course, the Albanese government supports the deployment of US B-52 bombers at Tyndall, just south of Darwin. And the Albanese Labor government also supports the pre-positioning of US Marines so as they can be, pre-positioned for a war with China. And they support the massive expansion of the Stirling submarine base off the coast of Perth to be a forward deployment space for the United States and UK nuclear submarines to make them more available for a war with China as well. We're literally signing up as a kind of just like a base, a US military base, an extended US military base, where we also supply a bit of military personnel to project force against China in the South China Sea. And they think that makes us safe. It so does not make us safe. It's such a dangerous geopolitical play. But to keep that on track requires US goodwill. US goodwill requires that whichever war the US supports or goes into, we loyally follow along without any questions. The US, of course, is unambiguously supporting what's happening in Gaza and the continuing to supply the Israeli Defense Forces with whatever weapons they want or need. And in that context, Foreign Minister Wong, Prime Minister Albanese are not going to rock the boat. They're going to support it. They're going to do whatever they can to be a loyal ally of the United States so that hopefully the AUKUS submarine deal stays on track. It's kind of depressing, I think, Kamal.
Thank you for that, Dave. Yeah, absolutely. Even before AUKUS, of course, our foreign policy wasn't perfect, but it certainly has exacerbated any ability for us to have independent foreign policy. And Paul Keating, for all his flaws, made that point very clear in his attack of AUKUS last year, which is probably some of my favorite things to watch. So yeah, I think it's definitely so important that we target militarism at this country to its core in order to be able to exercise any form of foreign policy that is truly democratic and truly respects the wishes of the people on the ground.
That was an edited portion of the conversation between Amal and Senator Shoebridge, and you can find a link to the full conversation in the show notes. Since the recording of that webinar in February this year, the Australian Centre for International Justice, or ACIJ, has actually had to discontinue its application to the Federal Court of Australia against the Minister of Defence, requesting transparency of weapons exports from Australia to Israel, citing further issues related to the matter of transparency. As such, the specific details of Australians' weapons exports to Israel remain difficult to ascertain, though as Senator Shoebridge's office has worked to show, data from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade shows that Australia has directly exported over $1.5 million in arms and ammunition to Israel in February this year alone. Long-term peace activist Lenny explains further in this following speech the ways in which the AUKUS agreement influences the Australian government's commitment to militarism. This speech, and many of the others we'll be listening to in this episode, was recorded outside of Ferra Engineering in Tingalpa, one of the many weapons manufacturing companies with operations here in Magunjan, including Heat Treatment Australia, or HTA, in Coopers Plains, L3 Micro in 8 Mile Plains, G&O Kurt in Acacia Ridge, and TAE Airspace in Bundamba, Ipswich. You can read further details about these companies and others around this continent and around the world more broadly via the Workers for Palestine fact sheet on their website titled Who Arms Israel, which will be in the show notes. Farah Engineering specifically supplies to some of the world's largest military aerospace companies, including Lockheed Martin, Boeing and Raytheon, manufacturing over 100 parts for F-35 fighter jets, of which the Israeli military possesses 50 and who have ordered and will shortly possess another 25 more. Farah Engineering are the sole supplier of the weapons adapters fitted to those fighter jets that allow them to drop different kinds of bombs from the sky onto people and plants and animals below. We'll hear more about Farah Engineering from more recordings of protests outside its gates throughout this episode, but in the meantime, here's Lenny speaking from the driveway in front of Farah, explaining further some of the broader conditions, including this settler colonial government's refusal to divest, let alone provide transparency, from weapons manufacturing companies, and how this gives rise to the necessity for collective and direct action.
Hello, I'm so happy to see so many people here today. I had the privilege and the pleasure to be here for a lot of the actions against Farah. Starting with the very first day when this gate was wide open, and despite the fact that this is a weapons producer, the lack of security was appalling. The gate was wide open, the roller door was wide open, and a group of people managed to walk in and put a stop to the machines. And that's why we're here today. We have to stop the productions of weapons, because otherwise, for as long as Israel has ammunition and weapons, they will bomb and kill indiscriminately. And it's important to have this mobilization again among different groups. We are here as messenger that profiting from war, destruction, and death is not okay in a civil society. And that's why it's so important that so many different people came together today here, because we can only fight this terrible system of destruction together. And we need everyone with their heart in the right place to come together and to become active in this stopping of madness that happens on a systematic basis. Because we can't boycott, divest, and sanction the weapons dealer as consumers. We can't buy their products. We can't do this. There's no choice. And the politicians never give us the choice whether we want to support with our taxes the military-industrial complex. The 917 million to Elbit was simply decided without consultation of the public and with total agreement between Labour and Liberals, just like the 368 billion that are now planned and earmarked for AUKUS. And AUKUS shows beautifully why our politicians don't ask the voters whether they want to be part of this system or not, because they can't profit the same way that the politicians do. A number of former defense ministers, or war ministers like I like to call them, made their way into the war industry or death industry, because the word defense is just ridiculous. Australia is not threatened to be attacked, no matter how much media wants to tell you that China is the next big problem and they want to invade us. If they wanted to, they would have done so, and most countries that don't profit as much from weapons, they just buy out a country without bothering to take over the government. The government can be bribed, and the bribery with AUKUS is fairly apparent. Scott Morrison, who set up this terrible deal for Australia, which in first place means that Australia is now a nuclear waste dump for the US and the UK, and doesn't really get any more secure. Who do we want to defend ourselves from? From Fiji? From New Zealand? There's no real enemies of us around. And we only make enemies by having a military posture. But I hope that all of you who spent here a little bit of time have realized that a strong community is growing, that people are here to support each other and to work on a better future that lives without militarism. Because that's what we have to do. For as long as politics and business is totally geared towards death, destruction, bleeding the country dry, continuing the frontier wars that never have ended on this soil, we have to stand together and we have to come together with all the diversity that we have to offer, with our different ideas and perspectives, to work for a future that we want to live in that isn't based on violence. Whenever we come together to fight a good cause, whenever we come together united by a call coming from our heart, we grow stronger. And at some point, we grow so strong that we can live without the death machine. And I hope to see this in my lifetime, and I keep on fighting to see it. Thank you.
Of course, ferret engineering is not the only target of peace activists like Lenny here in Meganjin, and the following interview with wage peace activist Margie Pistorius was recorded a few years ago at the annual Land Forces International Land Defence exhibition outside of the Brisbane Convention Centre, which faced so much resistance from protesters that it is now attempting to shift locations to Naarm later this year, where it will undoubtedly be met with further staunch resistance. Here's Margie speaking further to the ways that the military-industrial complex becomes entrenched and normalised in so-called Australian society.
I'm Margie Pistorius. I'm from Wage Peace. We're at the front protesting the Land Forces exhibition. There are a lot of people walking in, mostly men, few women, maybe 95% men. They're going into the conference centre to look at up to 700 exhibits, weapons exhibits. Not just weapons, but the sort of adjunct industries of surveillance, attack helicopters, things that deliver weapons. So weapons, sometimes we think of weapons as the thing that actually fires, but basically weapons are parts of systems, and systems include the delivery methods, the forts, the mobile weapon systems that they move around. It includes the surveillance, includes the telecommunications. So we've got 750 exhibits here. The thing that they've got in common really is that they're about killing people. They're about destroying ecosystems. They're about stealing land. That's what they're used for. So it's incredible fragmentation in this industry where engineers just create one interesting part of a massive field of products, and they just think about how interesting this little field that they're making is, the thing with the automated intelligence, or the thing that makes something move forward and over rocks, or the thing that magically makes it fire against a target. That target is a human. And we are here to remember that those targets are real people, and we're here using disruptive people power action because we think really this is so much business as usual, business as usual, business as usual. These people are filing in here as if it's entirely normalised to organise these complex methodologies of killing people. And we're here to say, we've got people who are on the front line saying, no, you're killing our families, you're harming our people, you're terrorising us. And they're being terrorised by equipment that is made in Australia or assembled in Australia. Now, the whole thing may not be assembled in Australia, but what we know is that there is a movement of supply chains within companies. So if you have one company that's in Indonesia and that same company sets up in Ipswich, in Brisbane, we know that there will be an exchange of components. So when we talk about export of weapons, we're really talking about exports of components, though we know that some Thales equipment. Thales is a French company. We know that has been sold directly, or not sold, given into wars, given into Indonesia, given across to Europe for wars. And the only reason they did that is because they made 200 extra for an election cycle. So instead of shutting a factory down when they'd finished their tender, they just kept going and made an extra 200 because they didn't want to shut down the factory because of an election cycle. So you start to see in a story like that how the industry is connected, it's decentralised. You know, you have one factory in Ipswich, you have one factory in Maryborough, you have another one in a different electorate, and this way the different electorates start to become dependent on the income, and the people become embedded in the industry, and the industry normalise itself in the society. So a case study for us, West Papua is certainly a case study and a story that we like to tell because they are our friends, but it also sharpens how we understand what is happening.
Do you want to talk a little bit about how you hope projects like this, like Disrupt Land Forces, might help to fracture the idea that this is, for many people, just another day at work?
Yeah, and another day at work defending the country or protecting people. These are both lies, and the idea it's for protection is a lie. So its main purpose is to shift money from the money that is extracted through the fossil fuel industry, made in the fossil fuel industry. There is a lot of money made there, and that moves into the government, in all sorts of different ways. Huge amounts of money. That's the main money that runs our society, really, is fossil fuel money. And so that money comes in from fossil fuels, and then, where does it go next? That's the question. So what happens is it goes up into the treasury, into the government, and then also where does it go next? So there's a question there. How does that money get spent? Now, what we know is the fossil fuels companies themselves try to keep as much of it as possible and get as much back as subsidies as they can. So they do that. But we also know that weapons companies and the pharmaceutical companies, for example, or the liquor companies, they are in the government's offices. They are in the minister's offices. They probably work as an advisor for the minister, for example. They might have worked for the weapons company last year, and this year they work for the new minister. And they've just made a little sideways slip. It's not clear that they've stopped working for the weapons company at that time, and it seems that they probably still are working for the weapons company. And they are in there making the legislation, deciding where the money goes, interfering with decisions, making sure that the money slips back towards the weapons companies. And then the normalisation comes, I think, a lot with men's culture. And we really want to bring the idea of smashing the patriarchy into this work because it just seems so caught up with men's obsession with toys. I have to say it, objects, these sort of interesting objects that they can make do things. It's connected to men's careerism, how men move in the system up chains. They give tenders out and they give favours back, tenders out, favours back. And in that way you move up a career chain. None of the decision making in there is anything to do with defence. It's all to do with how people are going to move inside the political system. It's so culturally corrupted. None of this is it's sort of not legally corrupt, but it's culturally corrupted. And this is what capitalism does to ensure that money doesn't flow from extraction, which maybe it shouldn't anyway, but it doesn't flow from extraction out towards to just cause, to health or to schooling, education, to flourishing communities. It's flowing instead into the weapons corporations, and we've got a situation where it's flowing to, at the moment, on top of the annual defence budget of about 30 billion a year, they're spending about an extra 30 billion a year just on these weapons projects. And a lot of these things don't really ever get used. They just get practiced on, that's the boys playing with the toys things. It's just a lot of training, a lot of sort of shifting them around, maintaining them, looking up. There's an enormous amount of our intellectual capital being just used for nothing pretty much. And it's no wonder that we don't even know how to hoe a paddock anymore, or put carbon back in the soil, or we don't know how to stop using fossil fuels, because that's not where people's minds are. We have maybe up to 12,000 people at this conference who are thinking about how to kill people, how to organise, how to destroy ecosystems, dispossess First Nations people. That is their program, and they're getting paid heartily for that. They're getting paid to be here, they're getting paid every day of the week to do that work. And they're sitting under the shower of that $30 billion. They want that. They're looking at. They're pretty much in there deciding how to divvy up that $30 billion amongst them. It's a very cooperative industry. They're all finding a little niche spot, and the government's giving stuff to anybody who can say, oh, we've ticked these boxes and we're really hoping to do this soon. They'll give money to that at the moment. So they can't even give it away really at the moment.
That was Margie Pistorius. It's worth noting that since that interview was recorded with Margie, the Australian government's military spending has actually increased further to over $50 billion for the first time this year, as the government directs money towards weapons manufacturing companies and projects commissioned for the next 10 years. Further to Margie's point about the ways in which weapons manufacturing becomes normalised and enmeshed within societies, we'll hear now from Louisa McCarthy from Students for Palestine UQ, speaking in front of Ferrer Engineering about the ways in which universities often function as pipelines for the military-industrial complex, funneling students towards involvement with weapons engineering and manufacturing companies from a young age.
At U2, we have a Boeing Institute, we have deals with Lockheed Martin, and far from being institutions about critical inquiry or about funneling students into thinking about how to make the world better, all these weapons companies, what they do is funnel students into researching and adding to the war machine that Australia is a part of. Students come to university and the degrees that are the most available, that are the most funding, are all about how can we make weapons the most deadly, how can we surveil citizens the best, how can we get intelligence to spy on people in colonised countries. That's what our universities want to find out. That's what students are funneled into. And when they graduate, they get jobs at companies that profit off murder, of mass murder and destruction all around the globe. Every single time a bomb drops on Gaza, weapons companies right here in Australia, they count their profits. They count their profits because they are making millions and millions of dollars off the death and destruction of thousands and thousands of people in Gaza. The F-35 bomber jets, which are dropping the bombs in Gaza right now, well, weapons companies in Australia have made $4 billion over contracts for the F-35 jets. And the share price of Lockheed Martin went up after 7th of October. So it shouldn't be any surprise to us that these weapons companies will keep producing weapons, they'll keep dropping weapons, because every time they do, they get more money. The people at the top of these companies go home with more cash to splash after they've killed tens of thousands of innocent people in Gaza and indeed in many other countries in the Middle East over the past few decades. The price for them in their investments is more profits. And we know the price that has been paid in Gaza, the price of mass starvation that is purposely being inflicted. We know the price of mass deaths, of disease, of destruction, of a place that cannot be rebuilt easily. A place that, apparently for Penny Wong, it's hard to judge if mass starvation, if cutting off water is easy. But it's easy to judge to give, $900 million to companies that cause that destruction. Shame. And I think we should make it very clear that their calls for an end to the war, for ceasefire, are much too late and they're too little. We need to cut all ties with Israel, because what does it mean for there to be a ceasefire if Australia is still funding Israel, if Australia is still lending political support to this genocidal, absolutely disgusting regime? So I think what we do today is very important, because what it shows is that we're not going to stick by. As much as they want us to forget, to be quiet, to get over it after 6 months, actually now is the most important time to say that we're not tired of protesting. Actually, we'll keep protesting until Palestine's free. And I agree with what people were saying before, that we want to see a liberation for Palestine in our lifetime, and we have a part to play in that. We have a part to say that people in Australia, we will fight for the liberation of Palestine, no matter if it's easy, no matter if it's hard, because it's actually important, because their liberation
nation is tied with ours. So I think the chant has never been truer than it is today, that in our thousands, in our millions, we are all Palestinians. Thank you.
No soundbite, man, we teach life. We teach life, man, we teach life. No soundbite, man, we teach life. Wake up every day and teach the rest of the world life. Fresh razor wire glisten in the winter sun. Wind cuts to the bone and it splinters some. Scars intersect, best protect your neck, cause we're heading ahead first into the interim. Struggle till our kingdom come. Off the king with a single gun. Heroes, not a single son. Kin left, not a single son. Not a single one. Not a single one. Fuck, just men in the sun. This shit ain't for fun. I'm blatantly numb. Listen close, you can hear screams between the drums. And you thought we was done. See them. Won't stop till this thing is won. Sowing seeds, but the season's done. 7 days I ain't seen the sun. Days turn to decades. What have we become? What have we become? What have we become? Fuck, man, what have we become? No soundbite, man, we teach life. We teach life, man, we teach life. No soundbite, man, we teach life. We teach life, man, we teach life. No soundbite, man, we teach life. Wake up every day and teach the rest of the world life. Trying to glean answers between the stars. But Palestine never been this far. Pain runs deep, you ain't seen the scars. Only place we find peace is in between the bars. Only place we find peace is in between the bars.
That was Palestinian diaspora writer, scholar, artist and musician Jamal Nabulsi performing outside the gates of Farah Engineering. Since the recording of Louisa's speech and Jamal's performance, a recent report from Declassified Australia has confirmed that the US military has funded $394 million to Australian universities via grants and contracts since 2007, with the University of Queensland being the second highest recipient of funding during this time, receiving over $60 million. Of course, all this capital is safeguarded by the state, and speaking also from the same blockade, Birigubba and Wanjiraba Solidarity organiser Sam Waripa Watson draws attention to the ways that police function as bureaucrats with weapons, employed to protect the state's economic interests over the safety of human and more than human lives.
I want to make it clear that today we're not relying on the cops for safety. The senior sergeant here actually drove his car in and 3 people had to jump out of the way because he was so reckless, driving in the dark. So, we're going to keep each other safe. The police will try and say that, they're here for the safety of the community, and that includes you. Senior sergeant said it to me this morning. But, really what they're here to do is protect the interests of this business and the interests of this state government, the interests of the federal government. And we are explicitly against those interests because those interests are supporting the genocide, they are supporting apartheid, they are supporting the occupation, and they support all of those things because they did the same thing here and they continue to do the same thing here. And if one settler colony falls, then the rest are weakened. Australia has been exporting to Israel, something like $1 billion a year, and over the last 6 years, over 350 arms exports. But, Israel is giving back. Israel, exports to Australia surveillance and repression technology. They give Australia AI technology that, is for facial recognition and and basically just mass surveillance. And Australia uses this on activists, it uses it on poor people, uses it on black people, and replicates the same thing that Israel does, which is an ongoing colonial occupation, an ongoing dispossession of land. So, when we're here today, I want to make it clear that we're not just fighting for other people, we're fighting alongside other people. Solidarity is not charity. Solidarity is action that you take that benefits you too. It's not a sacrifice. It's fighting for your own rights as well as the rights of others that are around you. So today, we're going to stand here and we're going to disrupt this business as much as possible. We are going to block this whole driveway all day if we have to. And, we hope that means that when the workers come, they see that there are, over 60 people here who oppose what they're doing and who are ready to come out at 6 a.m. on a Monday morning and block the front of their business. And I hope that they just turn away. I hope the trucks that are delivering materials to them and coming to pick up materials to take to places like Heat Treatment Australia, I hope that when they see us, they just turn around and they go home and they have a think about, what they do for a job and their place in the global supply chain of genocide.
That was Sam talking about the global supply chain of genocide, and another speaker outside of ferroengineering, Ronnie from West Papua, elaborates on the ways that the supply chain also touches the lives of Australia's closest neighbours in West Papua.
Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Farah, Farah, you can hide! You're supporting genocide! Farah, Farah, you can hide! You're supporting genocide! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Good morning. It's an honor to stand here with everyone here, amazing souls. And we are here making that statement that Farah can't hide. Farah spreads terror. As I want to continue, I want to acknowledge that I also speak to you today on the land of the Kwandamuka people, where sovereignty never ceded and remain illegally occupied. Always was, always will be. Aboriginal land. Always was, always will be. Aboriginal land. Always was, always will be. Aboriginal land. Thank you. West Papua, where I come from, it's Australia's closest neighbor. It remains one of the lesser known struggles, largely due to the Indonesian state's massive disinformation campaign and vilification of the people's resistance, alongside repression of media and free speech. Much like Australia's shameful support of Israel and its continued genocide against the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, the Australian government has not only been silent on West Papua's sovereignty, but it has actively supported Indonesia's violent regime. Shame! 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 Australian weapons companies provide arms to Indonesian and the Australian Federal Police, help train Indonesian death squads. This is all despite the fact that West Papua is so geographically close to Australia that you can travel between the two lands by canoe. Over 10 years, the Australian government has spent an additional $270 billion on military and defense industries to boost Australia's sovereign capacity. In real terms, this means giving grants of public money to weapons corporations so that those corporations can sell more weapons and increase their profits. Shame! 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 Defense giants such as Boeing, Rheinmetall, Thales, Albeit have all received lucrative contracts and grants from Australian state and the federal government. Shame! Shame! When I think about the lessons of West Papua liberation struggle, the struggles of the First Nations people here,
I think of the Palestinian struggle. Palestine has teach us about the West's ongoing colonial history, its racial ideologies, settler colonialism, but most importantly, about collective resistance in the face of tyranny. It has unmasked the West's hypocrisy and miseducation. May we see the end of Zionism in our lifetime. May we see the end of Eurocentrism in our lifetime. May we see the end of racism, colonialism, and capitalism in our lifetime. May we see a full sovereignty in the so-called Australia, a free Palestine, and a free West Papuan in our lifetime. It is up to you and me to make this reality. Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Farah, Farah, you can't hide!
You're supporting genocide!
Farah, Farah, you can't hide!
You're supporting genocide!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Respect.
Papua! Merdeka! Papua! Merdeka! Papua! Merdeka!
My name is Rima Hnaji. I'm an indigenous Palestinian woman. I was born and raised in Jordan, and I've been here in so-called Australia since September 2013. My father was born after Nakba. That's the catastrophe, which is the mass forced expulsion of Palestinians to make way for so-called Israel to exist on the rubbles of our destroyed villages. He was born a refugee in his own country, and then in 1967, when Israel launched its 6 days war, his refugee camp got destroyed. And somehow my father, who was a teenager at the time, he managed to survive. And I think one of the reasons he managed to survive is that armies did not have the sophistication or the technologies or manufacturers like Farah Engineering. Had Farah Engineering and other companies existed at the time, you can only imagine what could have happened. No social media, no footages. They would have wiped us out one after one, and we know that. We know that for a fact, because you know what's screwed? What's screwed is that with all of these footages and social media, with all the devastation, with all the death, with all the suffering, companies like Farah Engineering continue to exist and continue to manufacture all of these tools of oppression that colonizers use to prolong their colonialism. Shame! And then what we get from our politicians, all we get from them is talk. I've listened to those interviews one after one. Best of them would be repeating what UN officials, what international lawyers have been saying for months. But I see no call to action. For those wondering what a country like Australia can do, and I know some politicians are actually asking themselves this question. Why is Farah Engineering still operating on this stolen land? Why are they still operating? Every single tool manufactured and transported from behind these gates, they're used to kill, they're used to injure, and they're used to wipe out a nation. And we still have not seen any call to action from our government, from our politicians. One day, we'll be able to raise our voices loud enough so that they can see us. They see the humans inside us. Thank you all. Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Gaza!
Free, free Gaza!
Farah, Farah, you can't hide!
You're supporting genocide!
Farah, Farah, you can't hide!
You're supporting
content warning on this one. Descriptions of violence. Descend into darkness, heartless, torn from my chest. No rest in this carnage. Trying to garner hope, but don't know where the start is. All I see is martyrs on martyrs. Little ones the hardest, tiny hands clasping, bubbas grasping, charred limbs, blood-soaked garments, shrouds just an arm's length. Martyrs on martyrs on martyrs. Incantations, what I'm casting across shores, but I'm not a marksman. Marching, trying to build a raft, but I'm not a craftsman. Trying to speak to the world, but don't know where their heart is. Now if I find it, I'ma fucking carve it with the names of every martyr. With liberation never barter. This ain't a verse, it's a fucking charter. Martyrs on martyrs on martyrs on. From the river to where the sharks live. Intifada. Intifada. From the river to where the sharks live. Intifada.
That was, once again, Palestinian diaspora writer, scholar, artist and musician Jamal Nabulsi performing outside of Farah Engineering. Before Jamal, we heard from Rima Naji from Justice for Palestine Magunjan, speaking also from Farah, and emphasizing the ways that weapons manufacturing here sustains systems of colonial violence, not only here, but across the globe. We're going to round this episode out now with some calls to action. The following three speeches are from Greens member for Griffith, Max Chandler Mather, Benil Moeddin from Queensland Muslims Incorporated, and community organiser Dane.
We shouldn't have to be here. We absolutely should not have to be here. We know behind us that parts manufactured by Farah are crucial to the functioning of F-35 jets currently screeching over the heads of innocent Palestinian men, women and children, killing them in their tens of thousands, murdering them. And we're here because at a very simple level, we do not think that in Australia we should be manufacturing weapons that are killing tens of thousands of innocent people. That's why we're here. And yet what we will find time and again is that the major parties will attempt to paint us as the radicals, paint us as the unreasonable ones. But I would claim, and I would put it to everyone here and everyone across the country, that the real radicals are the ones that can watch the genocide unfolding in Gaza right now, the ones watching Israel carry out a manufactured and engineered famine, seeing babies die in their parents' arms, unable to summon the energy to breathe anymore, where we watch Israel carry out a carpet bombing of hospitals, schools, bakeries, refugee camps, killing people and murdering them in their tens of thousands, can see all of that happen and decide what they're going to do is allow the export of more weapons to carry out that genocide. They are the radicals. Every time you're made to feel like you're in the minority, every time you're made to feel like you're the radicals, every time you're made to feel hopeless, like there's nothing you can do, that's exactly what they want you to feel. They want you to feel like you're on your own. They want you to feel like you're hopeless, there's nothing you can do, and no matter how many times you come to protests like this, no matter how many times you come and blockade Farah, no matter how many times you go to a rally and demand an immediate ceasefire, an end to weapons trade with Israel, a free Palestine, that there's nothing really that has an effect at all. But you are helping to build a groundswell of support across this country for peace and a free Palestine. So thank you everyone today. We'll keep fighting and we'll keep fighting until we get a free Palestine and peace and an immediate ceasefire. Thank you everyone.
Assalamu alaikum, which means may peace be upon you. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we gathered and pay my respects to the elders past and present. Sovereignty was never ceded and treaties have never been signed. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. My role tonight is to urge you, to convince you to join in a direct action against local weapons manufacturers and suppliers. To convince you within the next 5 minutes why this is important and relevant, not just under the current political situation, but why it should be an ongoing action. It was Martin Luther King who said, "Our scientific power has outrun our spiritual power," that we have guided missiles and misguided men. One must wonder how far into the future he had foreseen. A time where we have nuclear arsenals, drones that drop bombs made from white phosphorus, depleted uranium, chemical and bioagents. A time where the world invests its brains, its wealth, its knowledge, its strategies to discover new, more efficient ways to kill. A time where the media, the entertainment, and politicians openly institutionalize war. A time where humankind has crossed all forms of human morality. A time where the killing, the murder of innocent children is not just termed collateral damage, but celebrated. Politicians will say it's about numbers, statistics, as a justification to spend hundreds of billions of dollars to build these instruments, the purpose of which is nothing other than to seek, search, and destroy. So let me throw in a few numbers and statistics, tragedies that are a direct result of the alliances of the military-industrial complex. More than 500,000 in Somalia, more than 1.25 million in Iraq, another 500,000 in Syria, another 500,000 in Sudan, more than 2 million in Afghanistan, 250,000 in Yemen, 50,000 in Libya, 200,000 in Burma, about 500,000 in West Papua. And if you're guessing what these figures are, they are an estimate of human lives lost due to recent conflicts. And to what's been ongoing in Palestine, the destruction, the demolition, the annihilation of an entire people, entire generations, war crimes like we've never seen before, the blood-soaked genocidal filth of which we are yet to uncover. Children crushed under the rubble, their cries deafened by the media as warlords stay safe in their bomb-proof layers. The images of charred corpses, shredded pieces of innocent elders, fathers, mothers, and babies. The soils of Arabia are drenched with the blood of the innocent. To quote Shakespeare, all the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten their guilty hands. If one were to break down the elements of oppression that we see, this military-industrial complex, there would be 5. The elite, the rich, the financial backers, the weapons manufacturers who profiteer from wars. Then you have the ministries and the lobbies in place to ensure that the unjustified wars go on. Then you have the corrupt world leaders and the politicians who are nothing but slaves. Then you have the media, this complex tool that magnifies and amplifies the voice of the oppressor. And then you have the uneducated general public who remain silent to the oppression. Time and time again we see that we manage to create change right up to the political leaders. But it really is the financial backers and the weapons manufacturers that we cannot seem to reach. With red carpets rolled out, these traders of death, these merchants of death, creep into our own backyards. And I'm told there are weapons manufacturers and suppliers right here in Queensland who create these instruments of colonization that come with the label field tested. Yes, field tested for sure on the children of Gaza. Shame on these corrupt leaders who allow this to be. Shame on those who turn a blind eye. The military-industrial complex may seem like the untouchable, like organized, sophisticated giants. But if the Palestinian girl has the courage to smile in the front of the barrel of a rifle, if the Palestinian child has the courage to pelt a stone to the turret of a sophisticated tank, then we too must have the courage to leave dents on this military-industrial complex. And dents after dents after dents, we will see this giant fail and fall. I'll end this with a quote from my tradition that resonates deep within my faith. A man by the name Khalid ibn Walid radiyallahu anhu. He was a man who fought injustice, who fought for the oppressed. He quotes and he says, "May the eyes of the coward, the guilty, never find rest in sleep. It's up to you and me to ensure that these weapons manufacturers do not find sleep. And if I would add, if Malcolm X were alive today, he would say, by any means necessary.
We know that there are people who profit from the occupation and people who really pay the price. And because imperialism is global and international, our fight and our struggle is also international. So what we're doing here, we're doing what we can with where we are, and a lot of people around the country, around the world, are also doing what they can with where they are. Even just last night, I was watching footage of people who were blockading the port at Port Botany, and they're protesting Zim, the Israeli shipping company, who profits from apartheid. And there were children, elderly, young people carrying Palestinian flags. And then there's police on horses, gun on their hips. And again, we see people who profit from the occupation, people who really pay the price. And it's important for us to have these, not have these conversations, but really take action and start to organize in cutting the supplies that arms Israeli companies, weapons companies. There are people being massacred right now using weapons that have been given the green light by the Australian government. And these actions that we take, they're not just symbolic actions. We need to create actions that make material disruption, because a system that puts profit over people needs to be killed economically, and that's what we're gonna do with, trying to end the weapons trade. Well, not trying, we will end the weapons trade. And just for the bigger picture of it, we want to build confident organizers. It's not just the people who are speaking on the microphone or the people in front at the protests or in front of the rallies. Organizing is a lot of unglamorous work. It's patience, it's discipline, it's bravery to sit to so many meetings. And we're just gonna have to build more people who are willing to do that, because all those unglamorous work will create the foundations, not just for the Palestinian struggle for liberation, but freeing Sudan, freeing Congo, free the Philippines. All these struggles are interlinked. So really, we want to be able to have people who are confident to get things wrong, and knowing that we'll have each other to back each other up. So yeah, come have a chat later and destroy the military-industrial complex with me.
That was Max, Benil and Dane all speaking to the operation of the military-industrial complex here in so-called Australia, and the urgent work that's required to interrupt it. In future episodes of the podcast, we'll be looking a bit more at some of the other strategies that organisers and activists are using to interrupt the military-industrial complex here on the ground. We'll be looking at what's happening within our local unions as they move towards applying pressure and direct action to end Australian support of Israeli trade, as well as the ways that organisers have engaged with elections as a side of struggle in putting pressure on the Australian government to sanction Israel and divest from the ongoing genocide.
Politicians, as I've said, think they're going to, in a few months' time, walk into the communities and shake hands and get votes. And while we're here, let's not forget that just the next door down, the Queensland Labor Party, who proudly promotes this state as an arms-selling hub, are the people who are responsible for granting the export licences to the factories like Farah Engineering, who arm the F-35s that we see day in, day out, killing hundreds of people in occupied Gaza. And I say this because these people think we're going to forget. They have not comprehended yet that the scale of this crime, the scale of this genocide, will change the course of history.
That was the voice of Phil Mansour speaking outside of the office of Labour politician and Member for Parliament for Rankin, Jim Chalmers. We'll hear more from Phil and from the rallies outside of Jim Chalmers' office in a future episode. For further information about speakers, information and ways to get involved, see the show notes. Voices from the intro montage today included the voices of Benil, Amal, Wadaweld Ali, Max and Dane.
You've been listening to the Justice for Palestine Maganjan podcast.
Produced by the Radio Reversal Collective.
Huge thanks to 4ZZZ here in so-called Brisbane for providing the space and resources for us to pull together this series.
If you're interested in amplifying the struggle for justice for Palestine through your own platforms and you'd like to access the Justice for Palestine Maganjan audio archive, please let us know via our Substack, where you'll also find details about how to get involved in the struggle for Palestinian liberation right here in Maganjan.